Thanksgiving always came with a quiet kind of dread. Not for the food or the crowd, but for the subtle ache that curled inside me the moment I walked through the front door. I'd grown used to the feeling over the years, the way my presence seemed to be tolerated more than welcomed, how my mother's eyes would skim over me like I was just another decoration in the hallway. I'd try not to let it sink into deep, but it always found its way beneath my skin. This year felt no different. My sister arrived just after me, dressed in a designer gown that shimmered even in the dull entryway light. My mother rushed to greet her like she hadn't seen her in years, fussing over her hair, her shoes, her makeup. My father came in with a glass of wine, offering a toast before dinner. He raised it high, naming his daughter the one who just got engaged to a man they adored, and welcomed the future son-in-law with all the warmth he never quite managed to give me. My name wasn't mentioned, not even in passing. I didn't flinch. I smiled, helped set the table, carved the turkey like it made me useful. That was the role I'd always played, the dependable one. The one who stayed quiet, the one who made herself smaller so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. I took the seat at the end of the table, near the kitchen, half listening to stories that didn't need me. My mother laughed at something my sister said, then gave me a glance and nodded politely. I nodded back. That was our language. As the plates passed and the wine flowed, I could feel that familiar sadness pressing against my ribs. Not quite grief, but close, like mourning something that never really existed. I tried to focus on the food, the warmth of the room, the candlelight flickering off the silverware. But underneath it all was the truth I never said out loud. No matter how old I got or how much I accomplished, I was still the daughter they never quite knew what to do with, and somehow that hurt most on the days meant for gratitude. The clinking of glasses always felt louder in that house. Maybe because the silence that followed had a weight of its own. My father stood at the head of the table, his smile broad, his voice full of that holiday charm he dusted off once a year. He raised his wine, looking at each person like he was presenting an award. To family, he began. To blessings, to love, and to the future. He nodded at my sister and her fiancé. 2 new beginnings and a beautiful couple. We're so proud of. Everyone clapped, even me. But I noticed, and I know they did too. There was no mention of me, no quick and to Marissa, for all she's doing. No acknowledgement that I existed at that table beyond the role of the turkey carver and the one who made the cranberry sauce from scratch. Not that I did those things for praise, but still, a name would have been nice. Just once, I sat there, cheeks warm, holding my fork in mid-air as if that could anchor me to the moment. I laughed softly, with everyone else, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, it did. It always did. Not because I needed a spotlight, but because I was tired of being invisible in a room full of people who claimed to love me. My mother reached over and gave my sister's hand a squeeze. She looked radiant, basking in their affection like it had always belonged to her. And maybe it had. She was beautiful, confident, effortlessly adored. I didn't blame her for any of it, but I couldn't stop myself from wondering what it would have felt like to be seen like that even just once. When the toast ended and conversation picked up again, I went back to eating, my appetite gone. I nodded when people spoke, smiled when expected, laughed at jokes I barely heard. But in my chest, something tightened, a quiet reminder that no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be enough for people who only knew how to love what they could show off. And in that moment, I realized I was done hoping they'd change. It happened the way most of their insults did, wrapped in laughter, passed around the table like a harmless joke. My mother was talking about how stunning my sister looked in her engagement photos, how the light caught her just right, how she could have been a model if she hadn't chosen finance. My sister giggled, modest but pleased, and everyone nodded in agreement. Even the cousins joined in. It was all very familiar. Then my mother turned to me, wine glass in hand, smile too wide to be sincere. Marissa, you've never been the pretty one, she said with a light chuckle, but at least you're dependable. There was a pause, not long enough for someone to object, just long enough for the humiliation to settle. Then my father, like he felt the need to round it out, added, you're smart. That's what you have. He said it like a consolation prize. I stared at the mashed potatoes on my plate. My throat went dry. I didn't know whether to laugh or disappear. My cousin glanced at me and then quickly looked away. My sister said nothing, just sipped her wine and shifted in her seat. Her fiancé looked uncomfortable, probably wishing he were anywhere else. No one called it out. No one said, that wasn't okay. Because to them, it wasn't cruel, it was tradition. It was the family dynamic they'd all grown comfortable with. I was the plain one, the stable one, the afterthought. And as long as I didn't cry or make a scene, they'd all keep pretending it was fine. But it wasn't. Something cracked in me, then not a scream, not a breaking, but something deeper. A quiet, trembling hurt that had been collecting for years. I had spent so long trying to be useful, hoping that being dependable would make me enough. That if I couldn't be the one they fawned over, I could at least be the one they respected. But I was wrong. They didn't respect me. They barely saw me. And for the first time, I wasn't just sad. I was angry. They saw me as dependable because they never bothered to look deeper. They never asked where I went each morning, what I stayed up late working on, why I hadn't been coming to Sunday dinners. They thought I was just busy, quiet, the kind of daughter who didn't need much, no attention, no praise, no real acknowledgement. But the truth is, I had been building something beautiful, something powerful. For the last year, I'd been pouring everything I had into a beauty tech startup, long nights coding, researching, studying user behavior, tweaking formulas, and reworking product designs. I hired developers on freelance sites with money I saved from skipped vacations and cut corners. I ran user tests with friends who didn't understand why I was so obsessed with lighting angles and pigmentation analysis. I taught myself more about machine learning in 8 months than I had in 4 years of college. I did it all while holding down a job, paying my rent, and showing up for birthdays I was barely invited to. I did it without telling anyone because the idea of their voices in my head, the doubt, the dismissal felt heavier than the silence. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, staring at a screen with bloodshot eyes, wondering if it would ever be worth it, if anyone would care, if I'd ever be seen as more than just the smart one or the one who helps clean up. But I kept going, not because I wanted to prove something to them, but because I needed to prove something to myself. That I wasn't just dependable, I was visionary. I had ideas worth listening to, a voice worth hearing. They never noticed the change, the sharper confidence in my posture, the quiet excitement when I got my first yes from an investor. They didn't ask what filled my days. They just assumed I was the same girl who cut vegetables and organized place settings while my sister collected applause. But I was no longer her. I had built something real, something valuable. And they were about to find out just how wrong they'd been. The email came in at 6:42 a.m., while the rest of the world was still quiet and my coffee hadn't cooled yet. I stared at the subject line. We're in. Just 2 words. But they hit like a drumbeat against everything I'd carried in silence. I clicked it open, reading the message again and again until it finally felt real. The investor had signed $1 million. Funding secured. My startup, my dream, was about to become something tangible. I didn't cry. I didn't jump up and down or scream with joy. I just sat there breathing. After all the nights I doubted myself, the near misses, the rejections that told me I wasn't ready, it had finally happened. And no one in my family knew. That made the victory sweeter and sadder at the same time. Later that week, while reviewing our onboarding forms and the latest pitch submissions from potential business partners, I saw a familiar name. My father's. The email came from his company, sent on behalf of a new project he was spearheading, asking to collaborate with our platform. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if it was a joke. But there it was, his tone formal, optimistic, unaware. He had no idea the company he was pitching to was mine. He'd never asked what I'd been working on. He had no clue I had even been in the beauty industry at all. I guess when you don't believe in someone, you stop being curious about their world. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit there, glowing in my inbox like a secret only I knew. I thought about rejecting it quietly, anonymously. Letting The moment passed with a silent no, but something in me stirred something deeper than revenge. This wasn't about punishing him. It was about finally being seen. So I printed the investor agreement, folded it neatly, slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. I didn't know if I'd use it, but I wanted it with me, just in case the opportunity presented itself, just in case they crossed the line again. I stood at the coat rack for a moment before dinner started, fingers brushing over the thick lining where I'd tucked the envelope. It wasn't heavy, but I could feel it there, flat, precise, quietly powerful. The investor agreement, printed on thick white paper, sealed in a plain file. No drama, no statement, just facts, just proof. I didn't bring it to make a scene. I'm not that kind of person. I brought it because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't powerless, no matter how they made me feel. Sometimes the worst part of coming home isn't the obvious insults, it's the way they pile up so subtly that you start to doubt your own worth. The backhanded compliments, the way your name never lands with pride in their mouths, the way your efforts are always either overlooked or rebranded as someone else's idea. I knew what tonight would be. I'd live it too many times not to. My sister would shine like she always did, and I'd be positioned as her shadow, useful, reliable background. I told myself I could take it again. One more night, one more dinner. But something in me was shifting, like the years of staying quiet had finally thinned to a thread. Throughout the evening, I kept my hands steady, refilled water glasses, passed dishes, offered napkins. I smiled when my sister showed off her ring, when my mother retold the same story of her sorority days, when my father laughed a little too loud at his own toast. I did what I always did, tried to blend in, tried to be small enough to avoid disappointment. But underneath the performance, I kept reaching for the edge of the envelope in my coat. It wasn't about ego, it was about truth. I wasn't just their background daughter anymore. I had built something they never bothered to ask about. I had value they never thought to recognize. And if they crossed the line again, if they reminded me once more of everything I supposedly lacked, I was ready. Not to fight, not to beg, but to finally show them who I really was. It was almost poetic, the way it happened. My mother had just finished pouring another round of wine, her voice light with wine-fueled glee as she leaned back and scanned the table like a queen pleased with her feast. She turned to my sister and gushed, once again, about her glow, about how lucky her fiancé was, about how proud she was to call her daughter beautiful. Then her eyes flicked to me, and I felt it before she even spoke. "Marissa," she said with that familiar, practiced smile. "You've never been the pretty one, but at least you're consistent." There was a ripple of awkward laughter, not cruel, just complicit, and then, as if on cue, my father chimed in with his signature approval. "You're dependable, smart, that's what you have, honey." They weren't trying to hurt me. That's what made it worse. They believed they were being kind in their own backwards way, offering me a consolation prize for all the sparkle I supposedly lacked. I glanced at the table. My sister looked down. Her fiancé cleared his throat, and my aunt sipped her wine a little too quickly. No one spoke up. Something shifted in me, not all at once, but with the kind of quiet strength that doesn't ask permission. I stood up slowly, pushed my chair back gently, and walked to the entryway. I took my coat from the hook, reached into the pocket, pulled out the envelope. I walked back to the table and set it down next to my father's wine glass. He looked at it, confused. My mother tilted her head, as if I were being dramatic for no reason. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Funny," I said, looking them both in the eye. "The girl you called ugly now owns the company you're begging to be a part of." Silence. No gasps. Just stillness. My father's eyes flicked to the agreement. His jaw tightened. My mother blinked. Her smile faded. I stood there, steady and whole, the girl they never thought would matter, finally standing taller than they ever imagined. And for once, no one had anything left to say. There are few moments in life when silence feels louder than shouting. This was one of them. No one moved. No one touched their food. The turkey sat in the center of the table, untouched now, as if it too had lost its appetite. My father stared at the envelope like it might disappear if he waited long enough. His mouth parted slightly, Like he had words forming, maybe excuses, maybe denial, but none of them made it out. My mother leaned back in her chair, suddenly much smaller than she'd been moments ago. The tight smile she always wore like armor had vanished. All that remained was confusion, maybe even fear, the kind that creeps in when control slips out of your hands. I didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the point. I didn't come to throw it in their faces, even though I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to finally be heard. I just stood there, letting them sit in the truth they never thought I had the strength to carry. The rest of the table didn't know where to look. My sister kept her eyes on her plate, frozen, cheeks flushed with something I couldn't quite read. Her fiancé looked at me like he was seeing a completely different version of the girl he barely noticed all night. Maybe he was. No one defended them. No one told me to sit down or calm down. There was no attempt to smooth it over or pretend it hadn't just happened. The silence wasn't hostile, it was stunned, heavy, and for once, I wasn't the one holding the weight of it. I didn't explain the document. I didn't offer background or justification. I let the agreement speak for itself, because it wasn't about proving my worth, it was about standing in it. They had underestimated me for so long, painted me with words like plain and dependable, never once stopping to consider what I might have been building in the background. Now they knew, and in that stillness, in the wide, uncertain eyes of the people who had once made me feel invisible, I felt something new. I felt seen. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need a round of gasps or a wave of admiration. I just picked up my coat, slowly and without theatrics, and slipped it over my shoulders. The room was still quiet, still adjusting to the version of me they hadn't prepared for. I glanced once more at the table, not in anger, but with a kind of finality, like I was closing the last page of a story I'd spent my entire life trying to rewrite. My father was still staring at the agreement. He hadn't said a word, but his expression was louder than anything he could have offered. Shock, embarrassment, maybe even regret. I didn't care which. My mother sat rigidly upright, jaw tight, as if trying to piece together when things had shifted out of her control. But she knew. Deep down, she knew the way mothers always do when they realize their child has grown into someone they didn't nurture. And no one asked me to stay. No one asked where I was going. That was the difference. Now they knew they had no say. I walked to the door slowly, every step feeling lighter than the one before. For years I had walked through that doorway carrying the weight of their judgments, their indifference, their polished expectations that I never fit into. But this time, I wasn't carrying any of that. I was walking out with something they couldn't touch, my own worth. Fully intact. I didn't slam the door. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The cold air hit my face the moment I stepped outside, sharp and clean, like the beginning of something new. I took a deep breath and let it fill the spaces in me that had always ached during holidays. And as I made my way to the car, I realized I wasn't leaving their house as a daughter desperate to be seen. I was leaving as a woman who had finally seen herself, and that was the only approval I ever needed. I got home that night and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. No voices echoing down the hallway, no forced conversations, no one asking me to pass anything or dim myself down. Just me and the quiet. And for the first time, it felt comforting instead of lonely. I hung up my coat and walked into the bathroom. Flipping on the light, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. Not because I looked different, but because I finally saw myself clearly without their words fogging the glass. My eyes looked tired, but they were sharp. My skin held the warmth of a long evening, but there was something steadier in my posture. Something settled. I remembered every time my mother compared me to my sister, every time my father laughed a little too hard when someone joked about my looks, every time I left the table feeling like less than. They had taught me to see myself in fragments, brains but not beauty, dependability without sparkle, invisible but always useful. And for a long time, I believed them, but standing there in the glow of that bathroom light, I knew I had undone something powerful. I had reclaimed a version of myself that didn't need their permission to exist. I had built something they didn't think I was capable of. Not just a business, but a life, a voice, a self-worth. a confidence that no longer shrank to fit inside their narratives. They called me plain. They called me smart like it was a consolation. They called me dependable as if that was all I'd ever be. But they never called me powerful. And now, they have no choice but to see it. I reached for a makeup wipe, slowly removed the layers from the evening, and caught my bare face in the mirror again. I didn't need a full face of anything to feel worthy anymore. I looked into my own eyes and saw the woman they couldn't break, the woman they never even saw coming. And as I turned off the light and walked toward my room, I carried only what mattered.